Headroom is the amount of volume in which we can push from the nominal level at which our sounds already are playing up to the maximum level that any carrier or our digital audio workstation can handle. Now, what this means is that we are leaving some space above the maximum volume of our sound up to the maximum volume of the actual DAW, what the track can take. Now, this is quite problematic in digital audio workstations, since all of those have like 32-bit or 64-bit even point float resolution internally, meaning that any of these tracks, even if I boost them up much higher than they are right now, they would never show a clip right there, since they have a lot more resolution up there to go into. So in the end, if we were working with 24-bit files, the digital audio workstation has even more resolution internally above that, meaning that it has even more resolution on top of the resolution that we have in our file. And virtually, we could push the volume up as much as we wanted to. We would never be clipping on the channel. And there is a different story in the mastering channel right here, where we would be clipping. So anything that would exceed 0 would produce the unnecessary digital clipping, unnecessary digital distortion that really sounds bad. But the solution to our problems is not taking care of that and then pulling down on the master track and not clipping right there and that's it. Another problem that we can encounter, I'm just going to reset that to 0. Another problem that we can encounter is that if we are pushing signals of any kind of tracks into an effect with too much loudness. And let's take, for example, write this effect from Waves. This is a non-linear summing channel from Waves, and it's meant to emulate analog strip of a mixing console for each one of your tracks, or just let's say group tracks. Just I have it right here on each one of these group tracks. I have one at the ending. So what would be the problem? Well, this plugin is, tailored after a real, analog device, and it does expect a certain level from the signal coming into it. So if we feed it with a signal that's too loud, it will produce unnecessary, or unwanted results. In a nutshell, what you would have to do with gain staging, as we call it, is make sure that you're feeding normal, and even better than saying normal is, let's say, sufficient, ample, amount of level of volume feeding into a plugin, and then make sure that the output of that plugin also has that same kind of, level. That will help you in some other areas too. But if we do that for each one of the plugins that we are using as processing on any of the channels, we are making sure that at the end, after all of those plugins on the output, we don't have a really big burst of level that is going to make problems for, let's say, the next channel where this is routed to. So if this drums track is routed into the master and we have some processing on the master too, we could be feeding the plugins on the master track, at least the first one, with a lot of volume, and maybe that plugin is not ready to accept that amount of volume, and it's going to produce artifacts that we don't want in our music. So to make the long story short, while taking care of the headroom, you need to take care that you have enough room above the maximum level of the signal that is playing, so that we can accommodate all the sudden peaks that might happen, like in snare drums, which really have loud peaks in their transients. So just to be clear, let's say that if we start off a track, let's say mine, and I'm gonna start with the drums because that's in, let's say, modern electronic music, the drums are the cornerstone of it. So if you take a look at my drums right here, the group track in which they are fed into is at 0. The level is at 0. What I'm adjusting is the level on each one of those. And what could also be a good practice is what is done for you already. If you load something, if you load a sample into a simpler like this one, and by default the volume is going to be minus 12 dBs. That means that it's going to be 4 times quieter than the sample actually is. And that is really useful because I'll tell you what, all of the samples today that you get are usually normalized to 0. So their, highest peak is at 0 dB FS. If we mix the whole song of 0 dB FS samples, in the end, we'd have a really outburst of volume right there. We'd be having clipping, and on each one of the plugins that we used, if there were any close to, a quality plugin, trying to emulate something analog, maybe even, they wouldn't be ready to accept that loud of an input. So what we need to do is take care that our outputs of our samplers, like this one, are not too loud. And once I play this, let me just play the kick drum. Let me just see if I'm anywhere in the vicinity of a kick drum, like this. So it's minus 12, and I also pull down minus 6 dBs, like right there. So all in all, in a nutshell, my kick drum is playing at minus 14. So that is where my peak level is of my kick drum. That means that I have 14 dBs left to go until the maximum of 0. Now, as I've told you, it will not clip even if I exceed that limit. So let me show you that. The only clipping point is going to be my master stroke, so I'm going to pull that down even, which is not a custom I have to do, but I'm going to put that down like this so you can hear me talking. And look at that. Now it's still not clipping. I'm going to pull this volume up. See, even like this, I'm getting saturation out of this plugin. I'm going to turn it off so we don't get any of those artifacts. So now look at that. I have this one, exceeding the 0 by 5.88 by 6 dBs. Right here also it's exceeding by 6 dBs. I'm going to put it more up. So exceeding the 0 by 12 dBs. That's 4 times louder than our 0 dB FS, level right there. And I don't hear any clipping. Everything sounds nice. Let me play that for you so you can hear it, the result. So the result is quite clean, all is good, and that comes from that internal high precision of the digital audio workstation. What does not sit well with the setting I just made was this plugin on the actual processing chain, you see? So now I had to go back for this plugin not to have outbursts of distortion being introduced, because it is not expecting levels that high. And with many plugins today, that is the case. They're expecting nominal, normal levels of volume. So to avoid any of those, I suggest you keep your levels somewhere nominal. Let's say keep your kick drum at, let me check. I would definitely keep it down as it was, like this, at minus 12, at a default setting, and then on the channel itself, well, most of the times I wouldn't go that low as to be minus 14. I'd, try to keep my kick drum at, let's say, minus 10. Minus 10, minus 8, minus 10 I feel more comfortable with, because then I really know that I have enough headroom, to work with. And believe me, you're not losing anything. The reason why people used high levels in analog audio is because when recording, you're trying to, hit the highest possible level to avoid the noise being, too loud in your signal. So by recording at a really high level of audio, you're making sure that, the signal to noise ratio is good for you, is quite big. Now, we don't have to deal with that in digital audio, with the resolution when talking about 24-bit resolution, and most of the samples you get are 24-bit. Most of the audio you're going to be recording into digital audio workstation is 24-bit. That's even a default setting in Ableton in most of the current, digital audio workstations. So in that resolution, even if you go 4 times lower than, maximum peak, it's still going to be more resolution and more signal to noise ratio than your 16-bit signal, which you're going to be exporting at. Meaning that, that 24-bit resolution gives you quite a leeway to work with. So keeping your signals at a low level is not going to make your song sound bad. Keeping those levels right there. And there is another thing that you benefit from also. So let's say if you're using a controller right here, controller to mix all of those, you would want to keep all of these faders somewhere in the vicinity of 0, right here, because then the movement you're making doesn't produce such a large change. You see right here, this kind of movement is 6 dBs, but right here, that kind of movement is already a lot. It's 12 or more. So meaning that the closer you are to the nominal 0 right here, the movement you're making physically with the fader induces a smaller change, meaning that it's easier to mix with a physical controller. Now that's usually a case in all the digital audio workstations. If you're using a controller, you would want to be close to 0. I don't, and I can always mix precisely because usually I use the faders and the mouse to move them only for big changes. But when I'm dialing into something now, let's say this mix, and I want to change a certain setting, a certain volume setting for any of these, I would actually click it and use my keyboard arrows up and down to go a dB up and down, or a shift and arrows to go 0.1 dB up and down, just like that. So this is what I do, and I usually avert my eyes from the actual peak meters, from everything visual, and just try to listen and see when it actually sounds good. So bottom line of the story, keep your levels in a normal level of, let's say, -14, -12, -10. This way, your master track, whatever you have in the mix, is never going to be clipping. That's the first benefit. Second, any plugins you place on your tracks are not going to be handling a too loud signal and introduce clipping onto the signal or any unwanted artifacts, since they are maybe an emulation of analog gear, or even if they're not, they might not be expecting a level so loud. So by doing that, you're making sure that everything stays fine, and you should do that on the outputs of every plugin. So if I'm adding any drive on this plugin right here, so that's the group track of my drums. Let's hear that. So you see, if I add that drive, I'm going to compensate for that by using this output level gain. Now, what does this let me do when I do just what I did right now? So adding drive to add that coloration to the actual signal, and then pulling back on the output so that I have the same level when the plugin is in and bypassed when it's out. This way, I'm actually listening to the coloration and the difference in the quality of the sound, the difference in processing with my signal, and not the volume change. This can also help you a lot when you're trying to assess if you did something right to the signal or not. A volume change is quite deceptive to the ear. So it might fool you thinking that you're doing something good because it's becoming louder, while it's actually not. It doesn't sound that great. So in my entire mix, I could do this to the drums, pull the volume down, and now I can compare in the entire mix if I actually like that change on my drums in the actual context of the mix, like this. And I do like it, and I will leave it just the way it is right now. Now you have to know that this, coloration is quite subtle, at least on this actual model of the NLS. I could change it to something else. Now I can't, because I do have, a setting that binds it like this. Okay, so this one is, at least in my ears, the most transparent one. But we have different kinds of models that sound actually different. You see this one adds quite a bit more distortion. Yeah, so these were all modeled after different consoles, different mixing desks. Yeah, so each one of these is actually a strip out of a mixing desk. Now this, gain staging that I do between each and every plugin in the chain actually helps me, when I'm bypassing the plugin to actually see if I like the process or not. And I really hope that it will help you as long as you have this in your head and you start producing music by having this practice in mind and always applying it. It's just going to be a part of your routine and it will help you immensely, believe me, because I didn't used to do that, when I started off and made some really bad mixing and, production decisions. And this actually just helped me shorten the time that I needed to actually mix something down, because this helped me, evaluate the differences of what I did in the mix. And hopefully it's going to help you as long as you stick to it and make it your routine, make it something normal that you always just normally do. It will help you to do better mixing and to evaluate, the changes you're making to the sound with much more efficiency and speed.